In tracing this history of the city-states of Lombardy, I have relied in the main for the facts on Lanzani's Storia dei Comuni Italiani and on the works earlier in date, but differing but little as to the events recorded, of Leo von Raumer and Sismondi. But I have carefully checked their statements by reference to Muratori's great compilation, the Annali d'Italia, and to the contemporary chronicles published by him in the Rerum Italicarum Scriptores. For special points, I have consulted numerous other works, amongst which are especially to be named Salser's Weber di Anfange der Signori in Oberitalien, and Cipola's Storia di Verona, Cantus in his Storia degli Italiani and Storia di Como, gives many curious details as to life and manners. Ferrari's Histoire des Révolutions d'Italie, though its political theories are wild in the extreme, gives perhaps the best idea of the warfare between city and the fury of internal factions. There are, however, 1 or 2 points in regard to which I differ from most of the writers quoted. Lanzani, following Ferrari and others, lays down a theory of the origins of the internal feuds of the Italian cities, which has found great favor in the peninsula. He holds that these factions were, in a large measure, the result of an antagonism between the civic nobility, who were to a certain extent of Roman descent, or who, at any rate, had imbibed Roman ideas, and the country nobles, men in whom German ideas still survived, and who had been forced by the victorious burghers to come and live within the walls of the cities. But this theory seems to me to be entirely unsupported by evidence, a point already mentioned by Salser. It is often easy to class the noble families of a city into 2 opposing factions, but it would be practically impossible to find any case in which one of these factions represented the original civic aristocracy, the other the conquered country nobles. Again, Leo and Sismondi, in their account of the factions in the northeast of Italy in the early 13th century, represent the family of Romano as at the head of a noble or Ghibelline party, in opposition to a popular Guelph one. But apart from the fact that the use of the names Guelph and Ghibelline is here an anachronism, the attitude of the house of Romano towards the empire and towards the nobles is entirely misrepresented. So far from being a partisan of the Hohenstaufen dynasty, Esselino, the stammerer, the first of his house to rise to prominence, had so incurred the enmity of Barbarossa that a special clause to secure him against the emperor's vengeance was inserted into the Peace of Constance. His son Ezzelino, the monk, sided with Otto of Saxony, the rival of Frederick II of Hohenstaufen. And though the last and most famous Ezzelino won most of his renown as a partisan of Frederick II in his early career as Gittermann has clearly shown, he had been hostile to that sovereign. And in the second place, when the House of Romano appears as the chief disturbing element in the northeast of Italy, we find it not heading a faction of country nobles against the burghers of the town, but, on the contrary, allied with the popular party in Verona and Salinguerra of Ferrara, whom we are expressly told was supported by the plebeians there, and in opposition to the great noble houses of the Veronese mark, the Marquises of Este, the Counts of San Bonifacio, the Lords of Camino and Campo San Piero. To all these great nobles, the House of Romano must, as a matter of fact, have appeared as mere upstarts. I have selected the maps to illustrate as far as possible the manner in which now one faction, now the other, got the upper hand. In the communes, the boundaries of the various city-states are taken from those given in the historical atlases of Spruner, Menke, and Droysen, with some small modifications suggested by the chronicles. The material at present available for Piedmont is very unsatisfactory. With regard to maps 4 and 5, I have colored the whole of the district subject to each city with the color of the faction which, for the moment, was the prevailing one in the city itself. But it must be remembered that in almost every case there was a body of exiles in possession of a greater or lesser number of the country castles and the districts adjoining them. A book dealing with Italy hardly seems complete without some mention of literature and art. But as regards literature in the vulgar tongue and painting, though the Tuscans, before the date at which this work ends, had already achieved some of their greatest triumphs in these fields, what the Lombards had accomplished is so slight as to be hardly worth noticing. With architecture, however, things are very different. Lombardy possesses a remarkable wealth of monuments, extending from the days of the Roman Empire to those of the Renaissance. In a city like Verona, for instance, there is an almost unbroken succession of remains covering the whole of that period. The epoch more especially dealt with in this work, the age of the free cities, has left us an abundance of memorials in both religious and secular edifices. In Modena and Parma, in Cremona and Pavia, we find churches in that style of Romanesque architecture to which the special name of Lombard is given, within whose walls were held the first assemblies of the burghers of the growing city republics, before whose altars knelt the men who went forth to conquer at Legnano, to whose shrines come some German Caesar to return thanks for a fleeting victory over the liberties of the communes, and to these solemn piles, with their porches supported by lions carved in marble, their facades covered with grotesque carvings of men and animals, their massive walls relieved by round arched colonnades, their high raised sanctuaries, under which are dim crypts supported by contorted pillars, succeed the lighter forms of the pointed arch introduced from beyond the Alps. As regards secular buildings, the grim square towers still stand in Bologna and Mantua, Pavia, and Asti, which recalls the days when round their bases rang the clash of arms of rival factions. Verona, Brescia, Bergamo, Piacenza show us noble examples of the magnificence of the communes. The public palace, or seat of government, called by various names, Palace of the Commune, Broletto, Palace of Justice, or of Reason, is still one of the chief features of these and other cities. From under the great archway, the carroccio, bearing the battle flag of the Republic, was drawn in the piazza by the hands of children or noble ladies, while the bell in the great tower above rang out defiance to some rival commune. In the great halls in the upper story met the various councils of the state. From the richly decorated balcony projecting from the center of the pile, the rulers harangued the people, or, if they lost the favor of the fickle populace, were hurled down to the vengeance of the mob seething in the piazza below. But there is no lack of books in English dealing with these buildings from the point of view of architecture. My intention has been rather to tell of the purposes for which these edifices were constructed and the times of which they are a memorial. The Lombards were the last of the Germanic tribes who effected a settlement within the limits of the Roman Empire. They selected the Italian peninsula itself. For attack and pushed their conquests far and wide through the land until their dominion stretched from the Alps to those lands in the south once known as Apulia and Lucania. But as they entered Italy from the north, the first object of their attack was the fertile plain watered by the Po. There they established the seat of their government. There they settled down most thickly on the conquered soil, and there they have left until our own day. The impress of their name, Lombardy, then, in the earliest sense of the word, comprised the whole territory bounded by the Alps, the Apennines, and the sea, with the exception of those portions which still remained subject to the emperors who reigned at Constantinople. Subsequent political changes have altered the extent of territory to which the name has been applied. On the western name, Pedemonte, or Piedmont, at first given to the districts lying close to the foot of the Alps, has, with the growth of the power of the House of Savoy, gradually extended its signification until it came to be applied to the whole country as far east as the Ticino and the Scrivia. The northeastern corner of the peninsula, detached for a time from Italy and added to the German kingdom as a mark or frontier province, received from this circumstance the name of Veronese or Trevisan Mark. This district, bounded by the Mincio and the Po, corresponded roughly with the territory occupied by the ancient people of the Veneti. When in the 15th century the city of Venice brought it under her sway, it was natural that the old name Venetia should be revived and applied to all this region. South of the Po, the great Roman road, the Via Aemilia, had given in ancient times its name to the district it traversed. This name persisted under the form Aemilia. And as the lands south of the Po became politically detached from those lying north of the river, we find the name of Emilia given to the states ruled by the Dukes of Parma and of Modena. In our own day, then, Lombardy designates the land lying between the rivers Ticino, Po, and Mincio. But for the student of the history of medieval Italy, the waveless plain of Lombardy, bounded by the vaporous air, islanded by cities fair, is most conveniently taken as including the whole space between Alps and Apennines, watered by the Po and its tributaries. It is a history of the city life of this region, the rise of republican institutions in the face of the feudal system which prevailed in Western Europe, the contests which resulted between the two opposing principles, the conflicts between city, and the final extinction of freedom at the hands of tyrants, themselves for the most part the offspring of republican institutions that I wish to trace in these pages. The central physical feature of the regions with which I am about to deal is the great river Po, which, flowing nearly due east from its source under Monteviso to the many mouths by which its waters mingle with those of the Adriatic Sea, during its course over 400 miles, forms, as it were, a great central artery running through the plain between the Alps and the Apennines, and affording an easy means of communication from the sea to Casale in Montferrat. The whole level of space between the two mountain ranges seems once to have been a gulf of the Adriatic. Only the chain of the Cottian Alps connected Italy with the rest of Europe. The streams flowing from the mountains and bringing with them masses of detritus in the course of ages silted up this gulf until they finally produced an alluvial plain intersected from north to south south by numerous rivers flowing from the Alps or the Apennines, which unite to form one main channel, the Po. The Alps, as is natural from their greater mass, supplied the larger portion of the material of the newly formed land. Hence we find that the lowest point of the depression between the two ranges, that, namely, through which the Po takes its course, is much nearer to the Apennines than to the Alps. It is, in fact, only in the neighborhood of Parma that the plain begins to extend to any considerable distance south of the river. This plain, level as it seems, when viewed from a church tower or from the outlying spurs of the mountains, shows, on a closer view, a certain variety of elevation. Besides the moraines which mark the former limits of alpine glaciers, and which sometimes attain the height of 1,000 feet, there are several isolated groups of hills rising like islands above the surrounding levels. The chief of this, the hills of Asti and Montferrat, divide the broad valley in which Turin lies from the rest of the plain and cause the course of the Po to deviate considerably to the northeast. These hills rise to a height of more than 2,000 feet and are separated from the main chain of the Apennines by the valley of the Tanaro. Another isolated group, the Monti Euganei, lies south of Padua and rises to the height of 1,890 feet. These hills, with the Monti Berici near Vicenza, and the ranges which run between the city and Verona, give to a large part of the northeastern corner of the peninsula the former Trevisan mark, a hilly character which is of importance for the history of the district during the Middle Ages. Besides these isolated groups, the Alps, and to a less degree the Apennines, send out foothills of lesser or greater elevation, which we have, therefore, in addition to the Lombard plain, strictly so called, a considerable tract of hill country in which several important towns are situated. The great lakes which are found in this hill country along the foot of the Alps have but small importance to our history. On the other hand, the rivers which flow from them which issue direct from the valleys into the plain have always, either as natural boundaries between state and state, or as means of defense against an enemy, played a great part in the story of Lombardy. They are almost all tributaries of the great central artery, the Po. Of those in the extreme east which flow direct into the Adriatic, some, such as the Reno and Adige, have either at one time flowed into the Po or are closely connected with it by side branches and canals. The chief of these rivers are, from west to east, the Dora, Baltea, Sesia, Ticino, Ada, Oglio, Mincio, and Adige on the north, and the Tanaro, Trebbia, Taro, Panaro, and Reno on the south of the main river. To the southeast, the Brenta and the Piave make their way through many mouths into the Venetian lagoons, and the Isonzo, flowing into the head of the Adriatic Sea, divides the purely Latin lands from those in which the Slavonian element begins to prevail. In the earliest ages in which we hear of this region, the uncertain glimpses which history gives us of it show it as already the seat of many great cities. In the center, Etruscan civilization flourished, and a league of 12 cities, of which Felsina, the later Bologna, and Mantua were the chief, ruled from the Apennines to the lakes. Already Padua rose among its waters, the refuge, so men said, of Trojan Antenor, and the Veneti, a people of uncertain origin, held a country where the Euganean hills looked over the marshlands round the mouths of Brenta and Adige. Then came a wave of Celtic invaders from across the Alps. The Veneti held their ground against them, but the Etruscan League, with its civilization and the cities which were its seat, disappeared, scarcely leaving more than a dim tradition to mark its existence. When next we obtain a sight of the Valley of the Po, it is for the most part a Celtic land, the home of a warlike race, pastoral rather than agricultural, dwelling but little in cities, whose territory, covered with dense forests and tracts of marshland, seem cold and savage to the dwellers to the south of the Apennines. Next came the Roman, who secured his hold of the land by building walled towns, opening up great roads, and establishing a Roman population in the midst of the newly conquered Gauls. To the period of the Roman conquest belongs the foundation of many great cities. Etruscan Felsina rose again as Bononia, Mutina, Cremona, Placentia, later on Parma, Rhegium, Dertona, Hasta, and many others were built to serve as bulwarks of the new power.